And speaking of Rachel, this is actually the Rachel and Rachel segment of the symposium this month. We have Rachel Fredman from HITLAB interviewing Rachel Scherl from Spark Solutions for Growth and the author of our book this month, the Orgasmic Leadership book. Now talking about the book itself and what it talks about, what it teaches women in leadership and women's health. So Rachel and Rachel.
Stan. Thank you, Stan. Good morning, everybody, and good morning to Rachel Braun Scherl, who we have on this morning. Rachel is a business builder, marketing strategist, renowned speaker, and author of the book Orgasmic Leadership. Thank you for being here today, Rachel.
Thanks so much for having me. Great to see you.
So you wrote this book, Orgasmic Leadership, and I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the book and kind of your background and why you came to write the book.
You know, it's interesting. I was thinking about this in preparation for the conversation, and it wasn't like there was one moment that made me decide to write the book. I've always worked in women's businesses, you know, things that affected women from the tops of their heads to the tips of their toes, and the ones that didn't affect them affected their families, and they're the purchasers and the decision makers. And when I got very squarely into female sexual and reproductive health, we had a challenge with the media that they wouldn't take our money for our advertising, which is now an old song. This has been going on for 15 years, but at the time, we were new to it. And after going to 100 different outlets, website, cable, network, radio, whatever it was, and we got, 95 out of 100 no's, we came up with a strategy that if we couldn't buy media, we were going to earn it. So in that role, as part of the execution of the strategy to get our message out, was a PR campaign about the disparity between men and women's advertising. So as part of that role, in addition to being the co-founder and the president of the company, I became the spokesperson. So I was doing a lot of media, promoting this idea, catalyzing the conversation, which simultaneously made people aware of the product and the story. And I started writing about that time. And I remember the first article that I wrote for Huffington Post was, I read 50 Shades of Grey for work, and I really could legitimately say that. And I wound up writing, probably 4 dozen articles for Huffington Post and a bunch for Inc. And over the course of being in the space, and there's such amazing, fascinating people, and it's such an amazing and constantly evolving space, people said to me, you have a book in you. I always like to tell stories and think of myself as a storyteller, but it wasn't until I was at a conference and I was sitting next to a woman who I had no crossover with. We are in totally different businesses. Her name is Karen Kahn, and I always give her the credit. And she says, I know you do a lot of speaking on leadership and entrepreneurship, but that's all boring. Why don't you do something that relates to your topic? What do you think of orgasmic leadership? And I said, it's the greatest name I've ever heard. But in all honesty, the J&Js and the AbbVies and the universities of the world are a little bit uncomfortable. They'd be unlikely to say, let's welcome the author of, the person speaking about orgasmic leadership. And one day I was doing nothing in particular. I was sitting in a chair. I can picture it perfectly. And I said, you know what? Orgasmic leadership is the idea for a book. That's the name of a book. And so I sent out an email to about 5 or 10 people in the space asking if I could do a structured hour-long interview with them, and that I would plan to release them in stories and ultimately put it into a book. 5 people quickly became 40 people, and I wound up interviewing entrepreneurs, academics, investors, thought leaders, people in every aspect of the broader spectrum that I would refer to as sexual and reproductive health, and ultimately wrote this book called Orgasmic Leadership, Profiting from the Coming Surge in Women's Sexual Health and Wellness. And at the time of writing the book, which I very much enjoyed, I had a ton of content. I had, written so much stuff, and I had given so many speeches, and I was, well-versed in the space, that the process of interviewing people and putting it together was fascinating. And so the real turning point came when I was sitting with my editor, And he was trying to, a man by the name of Henry DeVries from Indie Books. And he said, we have to frame all this content into a structure. And in that conversation, what we came up with is that I would frame all these conversations and all these learnings in the context of how people were building businesses in this space in the context of existing business trends. So for instance, there were now new products that were available like period panties because of advancements in materials technology. Not technology necessarily from an app perspective. There was a way to do subscription businesses in a way that we hadn't done before, and you could customize what people wanted. Again, results of technology and AI and understanding patterns and machine learning and all that. There were people who came up with, many of them came up with ideas because they had experienced a personal problem, looked around for a solution, saw nothing sufficient, and said, I'm going to come up with my own solution. And oh, by the way, there are in many cases hundreds of thousands, if not millions, if not tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of people who are having the same experience. And so those were the people that I talked to, and they're people that I had either worked with or had the opportunity to meet or had advised them. And some I met in the process of doing the book. So it took, probably a year to do the interviews. It took about 6 months to write the book. And it was a really kind of amazing journey. I've marketed and sold lots of things. Book marketing is an entirely different thing. And my idea when I wrote it was, this will increase my speaking fees. And it turned, and I did an ROI on that, and it turned out that it paid back. But really the bigger payoff was, even though I had known the information that was in the book, actually putting it down gives you some gravitas. And it resulted in, I can't even tell you how much consulting and strategic growth work that it resulted in.
I can only imagine. That's wonderful. And I'm sure the people that you interviewed were so excited to tell their story and get their story out there.
And yes, they were. And so many of them, the ones that I identified in 2016, when I started doing the interviews, are like killing it. Jill Angelo from Genève and Alex Friedman from Dame. And, and Finks, I had interviewed the founder of the company that was just acquired by Kimberly Clark. So if I ever think of writing another book, it would be something like Orgasmic Leadership, Where Are They Now? Because so many of the companies that caught my attention and the people who I had relationships with and the people whose stories were inspiring to me are still in the space. And the world is an entirely different world in sexual and reproductive health today than it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago, and certainly 15 years ago. So to be able to be in a community with people who are so smart and so creative and so disciplined and so willing to push this enormous boulder uphill and really so generous. I think one of the things that characterizes this space is really paying it forward. That's why I'm still day after day so excited to be in this space. It's the people, it's the ideas, it's the creations, and it's actually seeing little by little the societal change that is being brought by lots of voices.
Amazing. And
that's fantastic. Thank you both, Rachel and Rachel, for that tremendous interview, and for, again, Rachel Scherl for donating several books for the program today. And again, if any of you would like to join us for the HITLAB Summit on June 30th next month, it's going to be a one-day event. It'll explore what's happening in digital health as we're moving from a in-person on-site ecosystem to a virtual ecosystem. And it's going to be 8 hours of this same type of format. So the leaders from the digital healthcare system from around the world, from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. And next up, our next slide, to talk about some other fun things happening at HITLAB. Again, remember to apply by June 10th at midnight for your startup company. And also, if you do want to attend the summit, one more thing about the last one, don't just hit yes in the chat box here, and we will auto register you for that program. And ultimately, we would love to have you back. Obviously, it's going to be a long day on June 30th. We'll have 8 hours of 10 to 15 minute sessions helping you understand the perspectives of what's going on in the digital health ecosystem. And so in terms of the other activities happening at the lab, if you want to take a look at some of the other slides that we have happening, we'll just flip on to the next slide. And really appreciate everything that the team has done. Jerry and Rachel Scherl and Rachel Fredman. Really appreciate Yamina Zera and Raymond Mendiola and Jess Jum for all of their terrific work in putting this program together every single month. We can't thank you all enough. And we want to pay special thanks to our sponsors, in particular Vicert, as well as the Merck Global Innovation Fund, Metadata, and all of the good folks at the America's Continental Healthcare Alliance, LifeCare, AARP, and Goodwin. And so on behalf of the great team at the lab and all of our great sponsors, thank you everybody for joining us today and really getting a much deeper understanding on mental health and women's health. Have a great afternoon. Have a great long weekend for those of you celebrating, and looking forward to seeing you on June 30th next month. Take care. Stay well.